This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Jam-packed show we have on board. It is NBA awards time. The regular season is finally coming to an end. Only a few games left. Now it's time to talk about who is deserving. Who are the spotlights that shine brightest on the basketball court? You know I got to bring in my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mac contributor. I'm sorry. You know I got to bring in my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna, PNC, my brother from another mother, ready to talk, who walked that walk this year, my man, Warren Shaw, repping down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Yo, man, it is finally 65 up here in Jersey, bro.
Look at you getting a nice little weather report
listen,
in here.
I'm about to run outside, man, and I'm about to throw on some shades. I'm gonna do sun tanning. I mean, it's beautiful, man. It's remarkable right now.
That's what's up, man. But salute to all the listeners and fans of NBA Baseline. Again, as you alluded to, a great show here. NBA season, it's a long grind, but we're finally at the end here, and it's time to give out some awards, Baseline style. Got a great guest on tap with us, as always. Again, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. The energy will definitely be at full tilt. We have a great guest on board with us. She is an editor, also feature writer. She holds it down for 16 Wins a Ring, covers Thunderous Intent, also covers Raptors Republic, our girl, Tamberlyn Richardson. She's on board in the next moment or so to help us break down discussion and give the awards out. Who we thought are deserving of Executive of the Year, Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Most Improved, MVP, all of those wonderful honors. We'll all three have our round table, and we'll break it down for you and yours. Once again, we appreciate everyone tuning in to the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, and also available on iHeartRadio. So we encourage you to download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. Also featured on Google Music, and you can also catch the show on the Roku channel. Look, we're not going to waste any time. You know how we do. You know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
To the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on the breakdown, it's time to discuss awards. I think we have exhausted all the superlatives of what a lot of these feature NBA players have been doing so far this season. I think now it's time to put it all in summation and really kind of equate it to, are they deserving of these particular awards? We talked about it in the preseason. We've talked about it so far as in the midseason. So it's only right that we kind of lay it out on the line and say, these are the dudes that should be recognized as making this one of the more exciting NBA seasons, despite what many people have speculated. And this week, to help us discuss these specific awards, we have a really great guest on board with us. She is really one of the premier editors and feature writers that you'll see via throughout the sports media outlets. Currently, right now, she's an editor for Thunderous Intent. She's also an editor for 16 Wins a Ring. She has an upcoming podcast that'll be featured soon called Tamberlyn's Tip-Off. And she is really, it's just great to be able to have her finally on board. She's a part of the 16 Wins a Ring fam. Our girl, Tamberlyn Richardson. Tam, thanks for joining us this week.
My pleasure, guys.
So amongst all of this things that are going on with you, I know that you also are going to be featuring, I think you're going to be covering the Toronto Raptors during the playoffs for 16 Wins a Ring as well, too. Is that correct?
That's correct. Adam Joseph is very persuasive. What can I tell you?
Persuasive, or he's just like, you got to do this. You're the only one who can give us the goods on this. We need you covering the Raptors.
No, actually, he was pretty good about it. He asked me, and I said no initially just because I'm so swamped. But then I read a couple articles, and I thought, no, I have to do this. So part of it was maybe it was a little bit of bravado on my part too. So, but he is persuasive. I'll give him that.
All right. Well, listen, we definitely look forward to your coverage of the Toronto Raptors. And look, they've got a tall task ahead of them. I think a lot of people after last season were very high on the Toronto Raptors and what they did against the Cleveland Cavaliers, pushing them to 6 games in the Eastern Conference playoffs. And then even with the acquisitions by the trade deadline really gave us this inkling that they were going for it, that they should have the necessary pieces to be able to compete with this Cavaliers basketball team. And then the injury with Kyle Lowry put a lot of that susceptibility in doubt, not finishing off strong. What is it that you're looking for, though, at least in the first round of the playoffs, that'll re-give people the confidence that the Toronto Raptors should be highly considered as the team to get to at least the Eastern Conference Finals? Should they face the Cleveland Cavaliers, give themselves an opportunity to possibly go to the finals this year?
Well, they're almost in a perfect situation, if truth be told, because last year there was probably more expectations than there are this season. And so they've been put in a position almost of being under-respected, we'll say. They've almost fallen into the category of what the Spurs go through annually in the West, where no one's really counting on them. And yet there's only 3 teams that are sitting ranked in the top 10 in offense, defense, and net. And that's Golden State, the Spurs, and the Raptors. What they did at the trade deadline, which was bring in PJ Tucker, who's probably the most underrated pickup at the deadline, and Serge Ibaka, what that did for them is it allowed them to get what they needed specifically to go against Cleveland, which is a lockdown defender that they can throw on to LeBron, and just overall defense and a rim protector. So this team with Kyle as well going out for 21 games, it reaped the benefits from that because DeRozan has had to learn how to work with the team without Kyle on the floor. Before Kyle got hurt, I'll tell you guys, Kyle Lowry is one of those guys that just gets a look in his eye, and we call it Kyle time in Toronto, where he takes over games. With the team not having him around, they had to learn how to win without him, and they did great without him. So not to say that we wanted to enter the playoffs without him, but the young guys got some run. DeLon Wright is going to be a player that lots of people around the NBA are going to be talking about in a couple years' time. He's very much like a Sean Livingston type, very herky-jerky, but he can hit the three. He's very good defensively. They also gave Jakob Poeltl a bit of extra time. So I'm very, very high on this team because I think personally, and this is like a biased opinion because I live in Toronto, I live in the 6, I think they're the most versatile Eastern Conference team going into the NBA playoffs. And with the 29th ranked defense of Cleveland, everyone keeps saying they're going to flip a switch. But when you've been ranked 29th since the All-Star break, I don't know how you flip a switch to improve that much. There's been no team that's ever won the NBA Finals that wasn't ranked in the top 10. So
yeah, it's going to be a very interesting scenario. But and to your point, Tam, I really am curious to see, how strong the Toronto Raptors look now in the playoff mode. Some of these guys, and especially a lot of criticism towards Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, for how they played, in the early parts of the playoffs last year. This is a great opportunity for them to, again, fly under the radar and kind of exercise some of those demons, so to speak. If they show that level of consistency and really why we consider them one of the best tandems, this Toronto Raptors team has about as great an opportunity as anybody to see themselves playing in this year's NBA Finals.
One quick thing, sorry. Just on that fact, Kyle was hurt and no one really knew it. Like, he was really hurt last year in the playoffs. DeMar Carroll was at about 75%. Mind you, he hasn't lived up to expectations. And DeMar DeRozan was the one player in Rio this summer that was getting up at 5 a.m. for twice-a-day workouts prior to the NBA or the national team getting together for their practices. So they're prepared to make a statement this year in the playoffs.
I see. Why do I have this feeling that you are going to be out there instead of Drake? I can see you being the ambassador for the Raptors for this playoffs run. Maybe not so much Drake. Sean knows my affinity for Drake and what he does with professional basketball teams in the North. So there,
yeah.
there we go.
I don't spit like him, so probably not.
All right. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and get down to the business here. I don't want to leave my man Sean neglected here. So we're going to talk, end of the season awards, and this is where it all counts. We've touted about these guys in the preseason. We've touted about them so far in the midseason. Now let's really get down to what it should matter, which is at the end of the year, who is deserving of these prestigious awards. So the first award that we have lined up is the Executive of the Year award. And, you know, I find it interesting that in this climate of what we talk about with the NBA, with the increasing of the cap, and with so many of the moves that have taken place, many people look to more of the drama that happens off season to say whether or not an executive is deserving of the awards. But over the last couple of years, I think that they have got it spot on with some of the guys that have won, Masai Ujiri, and a host of others. This year, I think it's a little bit more interesting because of the teams that have came out of nowhere and have exceeded expectations. And you look back to what deals were done, not just trades, but also offseason, keeping certain players, offloading certain guys, making the money work to have the kind of competitive basketball team that it takes to be in this year's playoffs. Shaw, I'm going to start with you. Who is it that you think should be deserving of the Executive of the Year award?
This is obviously one of those awards every year. I think we have the conversation is how do you measure the success of this? You know, is it just a GM or executive that has the best team and the best record? Or is it the guy who made the most moves? Is it the guy who made the least moves? Is it something they did preseason, in season, or is it the combination of all of those things? And, for me, I think going into this year, Daryl Morey took a huge risk, with this Houston Rockets team. Dennis Lindsey for the Utah Jazz also took, an acceptable risk in bringing in veteran guys to surround the youth that he had on his team and to give them pieces that could fill in for his injury-prone roster. And even Danny Ainge, obviously going out and getting Al Horford and Bob Myers in Golden State. So those are like kind of the candidates I see out there from maybe even an off-season type of move type of thing. And then obviously with Masai, what he did kind of in season for the Raptors. But to make a long story short, I'm going to stick with Daryl Morey from the Houston Rockets. This Rockets team no one saw them being third. Even if you saw them being in the playoffs and, being, somewhere in there at 7 or 8 seed, didn't seem to being a top 3 seed in the Western Conference and the type of season that they've had altogether. And that has a lot to do with Daryl Morey going out and getting guys and taking a risk on guys who've traditionally been injured themselves, and Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson, and then even throwing more fuel into the fire midseason and adding Lou Williams. This is a guy who's did a great job. He's the Billy Bean of basketball, if you will. I mean, to me, he'd get my first place vote, but Dennis Lindsey in Utah also did a great job.
All right, Tammy, how about yourself? Who do you have lined up as being your Executive of the Year?
Well, I hate to blow the hometown horn, but I will. Masai Ujiri for me is the Executive of the Year for the combination of what he did. I agree with what you said about Daryl Morey in the offseason, but that contract for Anderson in 4 years is going to be scary. And I kind of am against what most people have said about the Rockets overperforming, because they were second 2 years ago. And if you look at the team itself, for me with the Rockets, if on Utah Jazz, if George Hill isn't hurt, are they finishing fourth or fifth? And with the Clippers, if they don't have their injuries, are they finishing where they are? So to me, it's not really a stretch that they finished third. So I actually like what Pat Riley did in Miami. I agree with you with Dennis Lindsey. I think it was a really smart move to bring in Boris Diaw, George Hill, and Joe Johnson to help the youngsters. They just got hurt by injuries this year. I like that Myers did what he did and then filled in admirably with JaVale McGee, go figure. And a few of the players, Matt Barnes, Sam Presti made some good moves at the deadline. For me, I always look back to what happened with the Pistons the year that they won the championship when they brought in Rasheed Wallace. And that move made the difference at the trade deadline. And for me, what Masai did by bringing in PJ Tucker and Serge Ibaka was huge. And what he lost was nothing. He lost one player, really, when you think about it. He lost Terrence Ross, a guy that was getting minutes. Jared Sullinger wasn't getting minutes. They gave up 2 second-round draft picks, and they gave up a first-round draft pick that they got for Grievous Vasquez, who isn't even in the league anymore, to Orlando. So that's why Ujiri gets a nod for me. I would put Daryl Morey second, I guess, Sam Presti third. That's kind of where I rank.
Well, I'm not going to necessarily disagree with where you're coming from, Tammy. I think under all circumstances, Masai should be deserving of it. I think it'll wind up being, Daryl Morey, just because when you look at the talent that James Harden has worked with, I don't think anybody would have expected this basketball team to really still be what's considered as a top 3 team. But to your point, we're going to see what's going to happen down the road with regards to Ryan Anderson's contract, but you still have some young pieces there, and also the emergence of Harrell. So Capella and Harrell, to me, may offset that, where they may be able to move Anderson. But to see what the Raptors are, I'm not sorry, what the Rockets are doing, to me is tremendous. It's interesting, and I'm sure we're going to get to our honorable mentions, but I would have actually thought that a person who should definitely be in the conversation would be Neil Oshie for the Portland Trailblazers, just simply because, one, he went out on a limb and re-signed Alan Crabb as a restricted free agent, where a lot of people thought that he should have just let Crabb go. I think it was the Brooklyn Nets that threw out a ton of money for him, keeping him, signing Evan Turner. This team was I know. Eek goes the mouse. I understand. However,
the Jurkic move was more important.
No, definitely. What I was going to say was, when they were 8 games under 500, to be able to pull off a deal with a team that was in their 8th seed, essentially, to get Joseph Nurkic and actually get the basketball player they were hoping Mason Plumlee was supposed to be groomed to be, I think was absolutely tremendous. And now it turns out that the Portland Trailblazers, minus the fact that they might wind up ending up with an above 500 record, playing in what we said was going to be arguably one of the toughest divisions, and we thought that the Minnesota Timberwolves should have been one of the teams in the playoffs, to still get this Portland Trailblazers team in the playoffs with the talent that he has. That trade, to me, was a significant trade. The only problem is that I think the expectations were that this Portland Trailblazers team should have been a better basketball team. That might be held against them. Shaw, I wanted to get your perspective on that, if whether or not a guy like Oshie should be given that type of consideration, given the fact that he did make that trade at the trade deadline for Jurkic.
Well, I mean, it's one of those situations, like, he's digging himself out of the own hole he put in himself in. You know what I mean? So, like, for me, like, it's great that they did be able to get Nurkic, and he did perform as well as he did, and now it looks like they should hold on to that 8 seed. But for me to give him credit for that, and this team has underachieved rather, because I think this is a roster that a lot of people figure would be no worse than maybe second. You know, in their division, you figure, okay, Utah maybe takes that step up, if you will. You really don't feel like OKC should have been better than them. I can't really give him a whole lot of props for what he did preseason, because I don't like the contracts of Evan Turner and even Alan Crabb. And Crabb has been.
Aren't they second overall in salary?
Yeah. They've really handicapped themselves, but they've gotten themselves a little bit out of it now, and I think they end up with multiple draft picks somehow as a result of that Nurkic trade. So that is actually one of the great things that they did, because they got a first-round pick with it from Denver, which I never understand how that worked out. So, but nevertheless, I'm not a big fan of what Portland has done from an executive standpoint. But at the same time, like you said, if you dig yourself in a hole, at least you have to be smart enough to realize that you made a mistake and then find your way out of it.
I'd agree with what he said about. For me, the salary that they spent, what Neil Oshie spent, was ridiculous. But I always felt that Plumlee was extremely overrated. I never understood the Evan Turner trade or pickup in the free agency market. I felt he overpaid on a lot of things. And that's where, for me, an example of what Pat Riley did by picking up all these guys on as free agents was a smarter move. So I would give the nod to Riley before Oshie.
You're tuned to The Baseline with our guest, Tam Richardson, who's joining us here. She is the editor for 16 Wins a Ring. We'll be covering the Toronto Raptors for this upcoming playoffs. Let's go ahead and move on to Coach of the Year. This should be a good one. Let me go ahead and just ask you straight off the bat, Tam. Are you going to tell us that Casey should be considered Coach of the Year?
Not at all.
Raptor Body. Okay, good. All right, so
not even in my honor rolls.
All right, well, let me let you go ahead and roll up into this one. So, listen, a lot of people look at records. A lot of people, look at the numbers. Most of the time, when Sean and I do our show, we like to look at the underdogs, like the guys that really should be deserving of this award, because they work with practically nothing and get so much out of them. Maybe there's a level of biasness then that Brad Stevens should always be considered as Coach of the Year. But at the same time, there are other coaches that, even with the roster, high-end, high-octane, they should be considerate because of the fact that they get so much from these guys. They are across the board. The numbers work for them. But who in your eyes should be considered as Coach of the Year?
Well, I mean, I think the award should be renamed after the man that could win it annually, which is Greg Popovich. And considering that Timmy left this season and they still got over 60 wins, to me is phenomenal. So I could give Greg Popovich the award yearly very easily. Having said that, and to what you just said, there's 3 guys on my list, and none of them are the guys that everyone's talking about. Everyone's talking about Mike D'Antoni, Brad Stevens, and Scott Brooks. My 3 that I will talk about are Eric Spoelstra, Quinn Snyder, and Mike Malone. All because, first of all, with Spoelstra, what he's done with that team, with the injuries, and with guys like Dion Waiters, like James Johnson, players that could not get along with other coaches that were considered to be malcontents, is amazing. They're still in the top 10 in defense. Quinn Snyder's had to deal with injuries all season long, and Mike Malone has got his team playing with a personality and an identity, and seemingly understood what to do. When you look at what happened with Nurkic and Djokovic, to me, that was Mike Malone figuring out, okay, I thought at the start of the season they had the 2 best youngest guys in the front court of any team in the league, but the 2 couldn't play together, so they got rid of Nurkic. And I just love what he's done there. I really like Mike Malone. I felt he got the shaft in Sacramento. None of these guys are probably going to win, but they all deserve honorable mention.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a great argument. We are definitely of the ilk of trying to look at guys who probably do the most with the least. And I really have grown, I think, to appreciate Eric Spoelstra and the Miami Heat and that organization for what they've done, as well as Scott Brooks, because our guy here at CL was one of the few people beating the Wizards bandwagon, saying that this would be a team that would have a bounce back season and be up there in the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. I just didn't see it. I didn't think they had enough, great pieces that fit together. But they did a decent job of getting everything together. But for me, I am going to go with the more obvious pick for me, and I do think D'Antoni has done a great job with this team. Although I know Tamberlyn doesn't necessarily agree with Houston, didn't see that they couldn't get here. I just didn't see it, and I thought if you just tried to kill it with fire, just over offense this thing, that it wouldn't lead to the type of success that they've been able to have. But when you talk about a guy getting somebody to play at their absolute best and absolute peak, D'Antoni's done that for James Harden, more so than I've seen in a good while. Just really extracting every little bit of potential out of Harden and what he's able to do. And for me, that's why he would get the Coach of the Year award for me. But Eric Spoelstra and Scott Brooks definitely deserve consideration. Mike Malone in Denver also does a great job. CL, what you got, man?
Well, this is going to be tough because I feel like what the Houston Rockets did this season really kind of made things kind of like a big quagmire for me. Like it just jumbled things up even more. It just means it adds another element. I want to agree with you, Shaw, with the idea or the sentiment that given what the Houston Rockets have done, especially in the Southwest Division, that he should definitely be considered as Coach of the Year. But I'm gonna kind of veer off the beaten path here. To me, it came down to 2 teams. And one, I think it was going to be predicated on how the Boston Celtics are going to finish out this regular season, and ultimately how better or how much expectations have been exceeded by the Utah Jazz. Because when I look at what both Quinn Snyder and Brad Stevens have done, again, you look at the roster, you look at what they basically needed to do to put themselves in the position that they are in, and I think that they have exceeded those expectations. While the Boston Celtics were going to be considered a top team, so to speak, in the Eastern Conference, they still needed to be able to run with the Toronto Raptors, which in many respects they kind of have done that, because the Raptors kind of have set the table as being really next to the only team that can compete with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And here the Boston Celtics have an opportunity of taking the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference playoff picture, which is something I don't think even people were trying to give them expectations on. And then you look at the Utah Jazz, given where they were last year, where they were maybe 1 or 2 games from not even getting into the playoffs, to basically being 17, 18 games over 500. That to me is something that should be marketably looked at when you're giving a Coach of the Year honor circumstance. Whereas with Mike D'Antoni, I think that the expectations are there. If he has his players, these guys are going to compete. We knew that the Memphis Grizzlies would take a step down. It was just a matter of whether or not the Houston Rockets would just basically play, at least equilibrium basketball. They've kind of done that, but at the same time, they've also kind of fell off a little bit in the second half of the season. The Jazz, have come on strong. The Celtics have maintained their flow. That being said, I actually think that Quinn Snyder should be given Coach of the Year award because they're going to be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference. Still, out of the 2 conferences, going to be the most difficult because you got to get through the Spurs and or the Warriors. Just to me, to get them where they are, to be the best team out of the Northwest Division, which we were saying was going to still be a tough division anyway. To me, I would give that just on those alone. But my second would have been the Boston Celtics, given the fact that Brad Stevens has his team as one of the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference playoffs.
Well, I mean, I think that makes some sense. And, to both of your points, something that I didn't even really think about until you guys started talking about it is I recognize what Quinn Snyder has done. Obviously, I recognize what Dennis Lindsey has done in terms of giving Snyder that roster. But Snyder has done even a better job than maybe even giving him credit for because they still haven't been healthy. Alec Burks has been injured. Derek Favors has been out. And they've had Hayward started the season out.
George Hill.
Of the year. Yeah, and George Hill's been in our lineup as well, too. So the fact that Snyder's kept that team afloat with the expectations that was supposed to be on that roster, despite not having everybody there, and they're still in battling for a top 4 seed, that really does sell a lot for what he's been able to do this year. And you know what? You might have convinced me to give him a little notch there per se, but I think the D'Antoni, the Rockets narrative has just gotten old because it's, okay, now we're used to them being good. So now we don't really want to talk about it anymore. But I give a lot of credit to Quinn Snyder and what he's been able to do in Utah.
I think a lot of it's going to be determined. I mean, obviously the awards get picked before the playoffs, which is too bad they don't pick them after the playoffs are finished because what happens defensively with the Rockets, who are a they shoot copious shots, right? So in the playoffs, are they going to get the opportunity to get up multiple threes, and will that affect how good they are? And looking at someone like Scott Brooks in Washington, they've been 27th in defense since the All-Star break. So, and if I look at Quinn Snyder, I agree. That's why I brought him up. The only thing is their offense hasn't necessarily translated yet. But again, when George Hill is healthy, that team is a completely different team. So,
again, it's so close to call. And I think because of what the Houston Rockets have done, I think it would have been a much clearer path for me. And I would have even given credit, say, to Eric Spoelstra because of the fact that when you look at the Eastern Conference picture from 4 down, it's still a chase to make it into that. To make it into the playoffs. And for what Eric Spoelstra has done with the roster that he's had, to me, is absolutely remarkable. But then you equate the wins with, the rest of these other teams and the rosters that they have, it almost kind of cancels out Spoelstra if, let's say, the team they don't make it into the playoffs. The likelihood is they will, but it's such a close call. Like, to me, what we're seeing is the emergence of other teams that are playing better with the rosters that they have than it just being predicated on just signing free agent guys and, it being predicated on the big money moves that you try and make in the offseason. Like, some of these coaches are actually getting some of these guys that have been in the league 3, 4, 5, 6 years to actually play better basketball in a better system that makes them more comfortable and is giving them opportunities.
And he lost Bosch and he lost Wade. Like that, that was huge, right? Do you give Kidd any kind of consideration?
I'd love to, but at the same time, I haven't seen too much of what I feel like the Bucks are still
a year away.
I would definitely say it in that kind of context. I'm not blaming Jason Kidd, but I haven't, like, this year, I see more of the players playing out than I see Kidd and what he did the year previous. In despite the injuries. Like, I know the injury to Jabari Parker was significant. You get back
Middleton?
Middleton in the beginning, yes. But him, Parker, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, I was saying, man, it'll be very interesting to see how Kidd gets all 3 of these guys involved. Because I really think that Parker coming on, playing next to Antetokounmpo was better for Antetokounmpo than worrying about playing next to Middleton and Parker. But now I'm just saying, now that you have Middleton, I'm trying to figure out how Kidd is going to get him to play well next to Antetokounmpo, because I felt like he was more comfortable making that combination work with him and Parker at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, well, for me with Kidd, it's very interesting because I think there's pluses and there's minuses. He made some adjustments, and he's still tinkering with the lineup to some degree. So it's working where they've secured a playoff spot. But he understood that at some point that Malcolm Brogdon, and I think it's because Dellavedova got injured, or Brogdon got kind of inserted into the starting lineup, and then he's kind of just stuck there, if you will. And Dellavedova doesn't get nearly as many minutes as he was, but he's found a way to give Jason Terry a role on that roster. Yes, they've had injuries, but he's had a revolving door at that center position. Greg Monroe has been good as a sixth man, then he wasn't good, then he was good again. So that center position has been a point of contention for me. They almost kind of win despite not having a solidified rotation. And that's my only knock on Kidd is like, it's not consistent. They're winning because, again, they have such great talent, but I don't think he's done an amazing job in figuring out what the rotation is going to be for that roster.
Yeah, I was curious what you guys thought. And Thought Maker's been interesting too.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. He turns to the baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, as we are going through the NBA awards. Now let's go ahead and move our focus and attention to the most improved player. I think as we start moving down the line, it's going to get a little bit tougher because it's funny to me. Like, I guess now you start opening up the doors, start moving guys to other teams and stuff like that. You have to start looking at the little man, the guys that, don't get enough pub, but are certainly putting up some boisterous numbers to make the argument that they should be considered MIP. Shaw, I'm going to start with you. Who do you have listed as your most improved player?
Yeah, this award is crazy. It's absolutely absurd. It's just because you can just go so many different directions. I've watched and listened to a whole bunch of people. They're talking about, okay, well, Harrison Barnes should deserve some credit. I live in the South Florida area, so James Johnson obviously deserves some credit what he's doing in Miami.
He's on my list.
Giannis, obviously, I think was kind of the runaway winner earlier on, but I don't know if that's still the case currently. Nikola Jokic from Denver, and Rudy Gobert. I feel like Giannis is going to win this award. I just feel like, but to me, we saw this coming a little bit last year, especially towards the tail end of last year, and how good he could be. Jokic, I think there was a lot of conversation about how good he was going to be in the summer, and then he struggled to begin the year with Mike Malone kind of using him and Nurkic kind of together, and that didn't really work out. The guy that to me has been the most shocking of that trio, with the exception of James Johnson, even Harrison Barnes, is Rudy Gobert. So I would probably pick Rudy Gobert as my most improved player because I didn't think he'd have the type of impact he has on both sides of the basketball. His metrics are really off the chart. He's been an analytical darling, in addition to all the great stats and numbers he's been putting up in rebounds and blocks, but his defensive win shares are up. Even if his offensive win shares are up, which boggles my mind because you don't look at Rudy Gobert and think, oh, he's this great offensive weapon, but he's doing a great job in matriculating through that offense for Quinn Snyder and the Utah Jazz. So for me, it would be Rudy Gobert. I'd probably give Giannis that second vote and Nikola Jokic that third vote.
All right. Tam, what you got?
Well, you're kind of stealing my thunder there because
we don't ever want to try and steal your thunder. You
make it. You cover the thunder too. Not trying to steal nothing.
Make it rain on your own, girl. Make it rain on your own. Let's go.
I'm sticking with Giannis Antetokounmpo because he leads the Bucks.
Now you're stealing my thunder. What is
that? Because he leads the Bucks in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. His only negative is that the team post All-Star break is 5.7 points better with him off the court defensively. The other players that I have, Rudy's right up there. I think he's going to probably lose out on 2 awards this year that he should be in consideration for, as is my third pick, which is James Johnson, who also was probably going to lose out on both picks. But what James Johnson has done to his body, what he's done with his career numbers all around. And then I have a bunch of guys, again, Jokic, Beal's into consideration. Otto Porter's kind of trailed off. Kemba Walker's been really amazing. Harrison Barnes, everyone said that he was a nothing, and yet now they're starting to see what he gave up when he was in Golden State, when he went over to Dallas. You can see what he was capable of doing, but it's hard not to give it to the Greek freak, given that he leads so many categories for his team. And is there anyone as exciting to watch as him in the NBA right now? You know, I think that Gobert will win an award, but it won't be this season. And I'm just really partial to James Johnson because of what he did this season, both from a mental perspective and just from a strictly, he looks like he's leading that team in a lot of ways on the court. It's sad that Dion Waiters got hurt, and it's probably going to cost Miami getting into the playoffs, because what they did in a post All-Star break and just, well, I guess it was just prior to that through December was really amazing.
Man, Yeah, so Giannis gets the award. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the honorable mentions. Like, I mean, not only did you steal the thunder, it's like you just put a cyclone in my whole mindset. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that so sincerely. All right, let me ask you guys this question then, and I'll start with you, Tim. How about Devin Booker? Should he not get mentioned for or get a throw in an honorable mention for most improved?
His numbers aren't really that different from last season, and he was my preseason pick to win this award. So I think he'll win it next year. What I like about him is if you go back and look at Klay Thompson at the same time in his career, Booker offensively is already better than he was, although I don't know if his shot is as pure. Excuse me, but I need to see him do more with assists and rebounds before I'm ready to give him an award like this.
Okay, how about you, Shaw?
Yeah, I mean, I think some names they're not going to get consideration here at all. So let me just get that out right away.
That's what we're here for, though. We're here to right the wrongs of what doesn't get mentioned. We're here to speak for the speechless. Okay.
Well, that's got to be Kemba Walker then.
Well, there you go.
I agree that Kemba is obviously improving and obviously made the All-Star this year too, but I didn't think Isaiah Thomas was going to be anywhere near 30 points per game. I don't care. You know, it's just
okay,
it makes no sense to me. And I understand he's really the only offense on Boston when it comes down to it. He's got to take a lot of shots, but he's still been doing that very efficiently. So IT gets some consideration for me. He's not going to get any votes or anything like that too, but he's somebody that I've noticed. And then the last guy too, and it really was, I think, a kind of turn of the All-Star type of thing for me is Ricky Rubio. Have people noticed what Ricky Rubio has done in Minnesota since the All-Star break? He's been absolutely phenomenal scoring. We always know he could pass the ball, still plays good defense, and he was on his way out of Minnesota, but he's played exceptionally well. And for me, I just feel like, he deserves a little bit of, pat on the back, a little bit of credit for what he's been able to do.
And maybe Cat too, a little bit.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, the problem is that the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's not translated to the Timberwolves winning basketball games or even, exceeding what I think people were expecting them to be achieving.
I'm eating crow. Yeah, I'm eating crow big time. I had them making the playoffs, so I'm eating crow big time.
But you know what? Don't feel bad because you're not the only one. Amongst a lot of the shows that we have done where we've done preseason predictions and things of that nature, I listen.
I had them 8th.
I had them 6th.
I thought that they were going to make it competitive in the chase to make it to the playoffs, but I thought that they were still going to fall short because I just felt like there are a couple of guys there that still have not grown to that role yet. And I mean, really just the bad start to the beginning of the season is what kind of has done them in. Outside of that, they have been competitive for the most part in most basketball games, minus the times where, Thibodeau sits most of these guys when it's blowout games against the Golden State Warriors or whatever the case may be. The Minnesota Timberwolves is going to be a very competitive basketball team. I just think that we thought instantly they were going to be competitively good in one year's time.
When Tibbs picks up Andre Iguodala in free agency this summer, watch that team next year.
She's already calling it. AI is going to head up to Minnie.
and the final note on the most improved too that we have here is obviously had certain guys not get injured even on this Minnesota Timberwolves roster, Zach LaVine, and obviously Jabari Parker in Milwaukee. Those two guys were heading I'm telling you, fight their way into this conversation. How crazy would it have been, Shaw? How crazy would it have been that you would actually have put two guys in considerations for the most improved? I still think that Giannis would have still taken it because by even measures, while Jabari was on that team, Giannis was keeping up the numbers that he was keeping up, but it still would have been pretty crazy to know that the Bucks actually had two players that you would have been putting in the conversation for most improved. Absolutely.
I'll even throw out the fact that DeMar DeRozan's name should be mentioned here, just simply for what he did with Kyle out.
Yeah. That is true. See, we're completely we're completely distorting the whole award. Like, heaven forbid if we were actually in a part of this committee.
Well, this award has changed over because
it's evolved.
Some years ago it was like comeback player of the year, and now it's more most improved player of the year, and comeback implied that they were whatever, they were out with injury, or I think Chris Anderson won it one year being out with drugs. He came back and then had an exceptional year. So, this is a very interesting award. Like I said, everything there's no clear connotation as to the guidelines of how all things should be judged.
Definitely. All right. So let's go ahead and focus our attention now to the sixth man of the year. This one might be a little bit more confined. There's definitely some players. Again, we speak for the speechless. I think a lot of people across the board have been eyeing on, guys who is it that's coming off the bench that's making things happen, especially when the starters can't make it happen? So, Tam, I'm going to start with you. Who do you have as your sixth man of the year?
I have Andre Iguodala as my sixth man of the year, and I know that's a shocker because everyone's going to expect Eric Gordon to win it. But for me, Eric Gordon's numbers compared to last season aren't that much different. He's shooting, I think, 2.3 more threes this season, but only making 0.8 more makes. James Johnson, for me, again, he has a better usage percentage, assist percentage, and three-point percentage than he did last season. Other guys I looked at were Enes Kanter, Zach Randolph, because he went to the bench. Lou Williams started the season off strong. Joe Ingles has been crazy in Utah. Wilson Chandler was on fire early in the season. But what Iggy did when KD went down was akin to what he did the year that the Golden State Warriors won 2 years ago, the championship, when he won the most valuable player. And I can't ignore that. To me, he fueled that 13-0 run, and his on-off court percentages post All-Star break are crazy. So for me, he got the nod over Eric Gordon and James Johnson.
Yeah, I've struggled with this, all year. And I think, you even made fun of me at one point the beginning of the season when I was like, wow, this guy looked like he could win it, and this guy looked like he could win it, because Wilson Chandler started off the year like averaging 18 points per game off the bench, and I was like, wow, he's running away with it. And then all of a sudden Eric Gordon got hot, then Lou Williams got hot, and all those guys. I think for me, the guy that's been relatively the most consistent, I think Lou Williams and Eric Gordon have kind of canceled out each other since joining forces, if you will, in Houston. And I actually will give it to Zach Randolph. And it's fun. The funny thing is, because I remember we had this conversation at the beginning of the year, and I was way off, because we had Brandon Knight and Brandon Jennings as potential candidates, and both of those guys fell off the face of the earth this season. But I'm gonna go with Z-Bo in Memphis. I think and I thought a lot of it is maybe just sentimental value, if you will, him accepting a role and not really complaining about it, and keeping this Memphis Grizzlies team in the thick of the hunt in the Western Conference. They had an outside chance at a top four seed for a little while. They tailed off here, obviously, after Gasol got hurt, and then Conley had to pick up some of his slack. JaMychal Green has been decent for them, but Z-Bo's been great off the bench, and just from a mental standpoint, and continuing to be that veteran leader that they always need, and Navo's had, and just not making any fuss about his role change. So for me, I love what he's been able to do this year, and I'd give him the nod of sixth man of the year.
Listen, I'm going to call it. Z-Bo, Debo's the sixth man of the year award. Look,
but he's not sexy though. You know that.
Listen, sometimes old man game, you know what I'm saying, should rule on the playgrounds at times. 14.1 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, and he's doing it relatively around 26, 27 minutes per game. And listen, he's still the type of guy that when he comes in, he can give you a double-double. He's probably more efficient now than he probably was before, in a system where, again, he could easily have been lost. He could have been lost in translation. I don't know how many times the Memphis Grizzlies have been supposed to be veering towards playing a more up-and-tempo style of play. They were supposed to disband the grit and grind movement some time ago already, and they can't do it because Z-Bo comes in and he puts in that work. And some people have even made the argument that they don't even know why Z-Bo should be coming off of the bench, because efficiency-wise, he probably does better than the guys that are starting ahead of him, guys like Martin and JaMychal Green and a host of these others. So, again, to your point, I would be enamored with the numbers that Eric Gordon would have been posting had they not made the move to bring in Lou Williams. I would have completely been in it. And I'm going to even go on a limb to say, had Dion Waiters been healthy still, that this could probably be a different conversation. You could also put in Jason Johnson in there, because while it's not measured by the guy that you say is sixth man, like he comes off the bench as a sixth man, it's who you rely on to come off the bench to do what their starters might not be able to do, or in most cases do where you need to rest your starters. And guys like those, to me, have provided that support. But Zach Randolph, he's been doing it all year long. I know you had a point to make, Tim, so go ahead and jump in.
No, I was just going to say I'll be thrilled if Z-Bo wins it, because let's not forget, this is the guy that early in his career in Portland and other places was considered a malcontent, a malfeasance. And then he goes to Memphis, and while they're whining and dining Mark Gasol and Mike Conley, who are both stellar players, it's been Zebo and 40-year-old Vince Carter that have kept this team alive while these guys were hurt. So I will be thrilled if he gets it. And I said the same. He was my pick for Sixth Man of the Year at the start of the year. So I'd be quite happy to be right about that. The thing about James Johnson, though, is his numbers for me are great. I always look at the Sixth Man of the Year. I relate it to someone like Manu Ginobili. Who's the guy that comes off the bench that he may not start the game, but he's always going to finish the game?
Right. And I think that's a metric in ways that I think tends to get lost, because now as we give these awards and we get very numbers happy, we try to incentivize that guy who, if they're given the minutes, the numbers should equate to those minutes. But I just think it's a matter of positioning. To your point, Tam, like, the Spurs now are so deep. The Golden State Warriors are so deep. And so that's the reason why you cannot just completely absolve the idea that a guy like Andre Iguodala or Manu Ginobili, and I think in this case it would be more Patty Mills that should be in that conversation. But you can't ignore those guys just simply because those teams are just instantly successful from what you see that the starting five does. There's still contributions that are made. Andre Iguodala is still one of the most versatile guys, plays defense and can play offense. It's just that he's not relied upon doing that all the time. And Patty Mills, instant offense when their starters can't score the basketball. He comes in and does what Tony Parker essentially is not able to do consistently for 30-plus minutes a game. And so, yeah, to your point, I think that sometimes that cannot be missed, and the metrics don't actually measure those. Which to me is why it's going to be a little bit closer, but it will be definitely confined. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, with our special guest, Tam Richardson. She is the editor holding it down for 16 Wins a Ring, and she's also covering the Toronto Raptors. You can definitely catch her on the Twitter side, and she is not shy to let her voice be heard on Twitter. Catch her at TTOTAMBZ, at TTOTAMS. All right, so we have a couple more awards to get down to, and this is where it really gets good. Time to get in that Trouble T. Roy Award, that Rookie of the Year. Tam, I'm going to start with you. Roll in, holla at me. Who do you have listed as your Rookie of the Year?
Malcolm Brogdon.
The Prez.
The Prez wins it for me. At the start of the season, when everyone was talking about all these new players that were coming in, Buddy Hield and Ben Simmons, who went down, and Brendan Ingram, my boy, the Canadian boy, Jamal Murray, I said, watch out for the two Philadelphia kids that are going to be playing this year, and everyone's forgot that they're rookies just because they weren't drafted, which was Dario Saric and Joel Embiid. But I cannot, as much as Joel Embiid, if you'd given me 60 games, I would have given it to you. Is he the most impressive rookie this year? By far. But 31 games is not a season. It's not half a season. I cannot give it to him. Malcolm Brogdon came in and changed the atmosphere of that team. They were winning with him. He played with aplomb. He was very, very astute on the floor. He's got great IQ. He made the team better. So for me, it has to go to Brogdon. Saric gets second. Jamal Murray gets third. And Joel Embiid, unfortunately, gets a close fourth.
Fair. I think that's fair, and there's been a lot of conversation, obviously, with Brogdon. And I think that is a heated debate amongst the basketball world right now, whether or not Embiid deserves consideration still because he's been the most impactful, or Brogdon because he's done the most on a team that's actually playing well and being successful. But for me, and we had this conversation a couple weeks ago, I'm going to give it to Saric, and I'll tell you why. Simply because his numbers are actually equate better than Brogdon's does, and I understand he's on a worse team, but Saric also had to play in the light of Embiid during this entire season. So his numbers could even be that much better if Embiid hadn't been around. And the fact that they're still better than Brogdon's, to me, speaks loudly to the type of impact and type of player that he's going to be. Although I think Brogdon, because he plays both ways, and has helped Milwaukee so much, he may end up getting the nod if people decide to go that way over Embiid in general. But for me, it would be Saric, Brogdon, and then Embiid getting third. And then guys like Jamal Murray and Buddy Hield and all those guys. I mean, it doesn't really matter at that point. But
And Willie Hernan-Gomez, too.
Yeah, he's played extremely well. Had a great game today as recording, too. And imagine if he would have gotten time all season long as well. Yeah. If they didn't, kind of dick around here with Joakim Noah, that could have been something that the Knicks could have really built on. But nevertheless, I think this is a pretty decent rookie crop. It's not as good as maybe everybody would hope, but you've seen some signs for all of them to start to get a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm actually going to jump on Tam's bandwagon here, and I'm going to go with the Prez. Look, 10.3 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, and I think a lot could have been said about Jason Kidd not having the confidence to put him in there when you had made the signing in the offseason to bring in Matthew Dellavedova. I mean, Matthew Dellavedova is a two-time NBA finalist and an NBA champion, and you shelled out a ton of money. At some particular point, I really believe that they may have seen the promise in Malcolm, but somehow he figured out a way to give Jason Kidd the confidence that he needs to put him out there despite the injury fest that has plagued the Milwaukee Bucks throughout the course of this regular season. By just the simple fact that Embiid did not finish the season due to the injury, or else we would clearly be talking about Embiid, no questions asked, hands down rookie of the year. But it definitely became a much tighter race because of that. And when I look at the contributions that Brogdon makes as a /point guard, 2-guard type player for the Milwaukee Bucks, the Bucks are in the playoff picture. Whereas with Saric, I still think that he's trying to find his way still, but because he's been given the opportunity and the minutes finally, he certainly has emerged as someone that we need to look out for and definitely going to be a key player moving forward. I just feel like as far as impact goes, when you look at the outset of the rookies that are listed here, because look, you could have thrown in Marquise Chris. He's finally getting himself opportunity, to play for the Phoenix Suns. I just think numbers are not going to equate as much as I think the impact that a guy like Brogdon has brought to the Milwaukee Bucks, because had he not come into that, I don't think that we're talking about the Bucks holistically as a team even being in the playoffs, because of the fact that we were still focused on the injuries of Middleton and the injury that took place with Jabari Parker at the beginning of the season. So I definitely give it to, and he's been consistent. He's getting the minutes now more than ever because they have to rely on him to come and contribute for that team.
And he's getting 4.3 assists and shooting over 40% from three. Like, hello.
Yeah. I mean, no, there's no question. But I will say to Shaw's point, it's not a runaway, because I do think you get enamored with the fact that when Embiid went down, we stopped paying attention to the Philadelphia 76ers, but you do recognize the talent with Covington, and now with what Saric is definitely bringing to the table, you're looking at this and saying, wow, had he figured this out at the beginning of the season, would have probably given more confidence for Brown to play him a heck of a lot more than what we saw, and we probably would be talking about a tandem in Embiid and Saric that would have easily catapulted him in that conversation to talk about Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, and my only thing with that is again, I think Sark has probably had the most struggles because he's had to deal with the Okafor, Noel, and all of that situation and try to fight and struggle his way for minutes when he probably should have been playing all along. And the fact that he's still where he's at with all of that in tow kind of speaks a lot to me. But again, I won't disagree, because Milwaukee's just a better team, and Brogdon's had a more impact on his team's success than maybe Saric has, because obviously Philadelphia is not good. But I don't want to knock Saric because of that, because he's had more to deal with all those other guys kind of being touted in front of him, and he's just figured out a way to still be impactful nevertheless. So this is going to be a really interesting race when it all comes down.
Absolutely. And the other thing about this year with the rookies is, as much as they've been disappointing on a whole, because so many people expected Chris Dunn, for example, to be better, and Brandon Ingram to be better. In 5 years' time, we'll be talking about a lot more of these rookies from this season and the impact they're having on their teams, because a lot of the players drafted were European. A lot of the players drafted are underweight, like Brandon Ingram and Marquise Chris. Damn Vlade. Serious. The Raptors would have had Chris if it wasn't for Vlade Divac. Anyway, so I think in 5 years' time, we're going to be talking about a lot more of these players than we are this season.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree with you. I want to get a quick perspective from both of you guys. How much do you think, though, has these rookies and the disappointment of them not playing up to these hype and the expectations, how much of that is credited to the coaches, like Luke Walton coaching Brandon Ingram? We talked about Jason Kidd and the impact that, he's had. So, with Malcolm Brogdon, we look at Atkinson and his reliance on playing Isaiah Whitehead, and like how much of it do you think that when we talk about some of these premier lottery pick players that they were impacted by the teams that they were playing on and the coaching system that they basically had to play under?
Well, I don't think any of them were in a ready-made situation. I think all of them had to endure some struggles, or veterans guys, or even young talent that was drafted a year ago. In the case of the Lakers, in terms of them trying to get their opportunity. Like, so for me, I don't know if anybody was really set up for immediate success. I think we talked about earlier in the year in terms of like we were shocked that Buddy Hield didn't kind of just run out and take that shooting guard position and be that guy in New Orleans before he got traded to Sacramento. And they, because Tyreek was out and had all those injuries, and he still wasn't the guy. They were messing around with Langston Galloway and Tim Frazier and all that, and it kind of boggled our mind. So for me, I don't think anybody, and I'm trying to go through right now who had the most opportunity immediately to impact their teams, and I can't say that anybody really did.
What about you, Tim?
Well, Buddy Hield's 24 years old. I don't know if I can blame that on Alvin Gentry. Like, here's a kid that should have been ready. Brogdon came in and when given the opportunity, performed. I like Dario Saric a lot, but I'm not sure how much of that falls on Brown. And beyond that, is it not the development staff that's more to be factored here? When I look at the Raptors, for example, with Lowry's injury, you started seeing Fred VanVleet, who was the fourth point guard on the team, and DeLon Murray, who's the third point guard, and he got hurt because in the summer league he had the shoulder injury. I think he would have been in the conversation this year for most improved had he not been injured. But I think a lot of it has to do with how the team, and whether this falls upon the head coach or the coaching staff as a unit, I'm not sure, but how they utilize their D-League teams. And there are a couple teams obviously still in the league that are doing the utilizing one team and a bunch of players go to
sharing, they're sharing the D-League rosters.
But how they utilize the D-League to develop them is a factor. Obviously, how their development coaches work with them is a factor. But ultimately, it comes down to what's in the gut, and when given the opportunity, do you perform? Norman Powell last year had to step up and perform when DeMarre Carroll went down, and he did. So it's up to the player. I'm sorry. Like, if they put you in a situation where, like Willie Hernan-Gomez in New York, when he got given the opportunity, he stepped up to the table. The same thing with Saric. So for me, it's up to the player, not up to the coach.
Truth. Tam Richardson joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast as we go through our NBA awards, and we're down to the two, the DYP and MVP. So, Shaw, I'm going to start with you. Defensive Player of the Year.
I'm going to give you, I think, the obvious candidates. You got Kawhi, you got Rudy Gobert, and Draymond Green. At the beginning of the year, and this is probably the only thing that I, think has come to fruition for me when it comes to picking this out, is like I just felt like Draymond was going to have an unbelievable year with KD on that roster, where Draymond wouldn't be responsible so much to even try to score, and he can even dig in on the defensive side of the basketball a little bit more. And he's, obviously done a great job assisting and getting other players involved from that side. But I think Draymond, with his ability to switch and guard so many different positions, is probably going to win this award. Rudy Gobert, as we've talked about kind of at length on this show, he's been nominated for a couple things here. I think he's going to finish a very, very close second, with Kawhi Leonard finishing third.
I'm exactly in the same position. For me, Gobert has been so phenomenal this season, but he's going to win this award down the road. To your point earlier, you were mentioning about how you look at an award and what factors into it when we're talking about sixth man of the year. When you look at defensive player of the year, you have to take into consideration which team is number one defensively, and that team is Golden State. So that gave me the edge for Draymond. And it also pointed out something very interesting for me when you look at Kawhi, because everyone's talking about his matrices this year and how his numbers with the team being better defensively with him off court. But it doesn't take into consideration all the other factors. And unfortunately, NBA.com used to run the hustle stats. They don't run them anymore. But it just goes to show you, like, pound for pound, there is nobody in the NBA that can defend a player and defend every single position. Sorry, LeBron. But Kawhi Leonard is that player. He can defend the point guard through the center, the 1 through 5 positions. So to me, the fact that his numbers aren't demonstrating that points to the fact that you can't just look at on-off court. And another player who won't get consideration, that if he had been with this team all season, I think would have gotten consideration, and that's PJ Tucker, because his numbers since coming over to the Raptors are phenomenal. Wow. When he's on court, the Raptors play 99.8% defense. When he's off the court, they play 109. That's huge.
Well, yeah. And so listen, if the numbers are going to speak, then, definitely. And I don't think anyone would ever consider PJ Tucker to be under the radar for someone like defensive player of the year. So that's actually a very good point. I'm glad that you brought up that bit of information.
Sorry, one more thing. My disappointment is my pick for coming into the season. Very disappointed that this team failed me and this player failed me, which is Michael Kidd-Gilchrist.
Wow, really? MKG?
Oh, he's got the tools. It's just,
I think he's one of the best defenders in the league. I've seen him lock down the 2s and 3s, and he has the ability to be a lockdown defender. And when they were good last season, it was mostly due to when he was on the court, because remember, he was injured a lot. So I thought with a fully healthy season, he could be a really major factor. And unfortunately, that team did not.
Well, listen, Shaw, we would have considered him as a dark horse.
Yeah, but it all goes to their overall defense too. So he wasn't able to make up for some of the lacks that they've had. I've heard Steve Clifford, ad nauseum complain about how his defense just hasn't been consistent all season long. And yeah, they've had some injuries here and there too. But yeah, MKG, as she alluded, he has the tools to be one of those guys. And he came into the league as a defender. Everyone knew that his shot was the thing they needed to work on. But it's been disappointing, I think, in Charlotte all around, for to a man, really, with the exception of Kemba, that just really have been able to duplicate some of the successes that they had a season ago.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. So, for me, I think it's going to wind up being Draymond Green. To one point that I was going to actually make with Shaw and what he was referencing with what Draymond Green has been able to do this season, I believe that what happened with Kevin Durant, because I had said, earlier this year that, while everybody's enamored with what Kevin Durant was doing with Golden State as being the scorer and everyone kind of yielding to him and his ability to score the basketball, what he had been doing defensively for the Golden State Warriors is exactly the reason why I said if this team figures things out the way that they need to figure it out, there will not be a team in the NBA this season that's going to be able to stop them, because what kills them is the fact that they don't play consistent defense, and they're showing that they can do that. What Kevin Durant was doing for the Golden State Warriors defensively was what the Cleveland Cavaliers got out of their team defensively against the Golden State Warriors last year in the finals. And to me, that was one of the more important reasons why they made that kind of play, because I don't think that they still would have seen that having Harrison Barnes and maybe even still keeping Andrew Bogut. Once Kevin Durant went down to injury, it really opened up the door from an awards perspective of why we still talk about Draymond Green as being one of the premier defenders and really is going to be deserving of winning this reward. So he's going to get the reward. But to your point, Tam, what Rudy Gobert did this year is absolutely phenomenal, especially with a team that is supposed to be so offensively minded. He still allows the Utah Jazz to be a top 10 team defensively, and he is one of the more feared centers in the game of basketball. I thought that this was the reign of DeAndre Jordan, but Rudy Gobert has vastly become the number one defensive player, given what he has been able to do this year for the Utah Jazz, and staying healthy has allowed them to be consistently a top team, when it comes to that Western Conference playoff picture, hanging around in the middle part of it and things of that nature. This is one of the teams that you don't want to be playing in the playoffs. They just don't want to be. You just don't want to be. Like, if you're the Golden State Warriors, you don't want to play them in the first round. If you are the San Antonio Spurs, you don't want to be playing them in the first round, because I think that this is the type of basketball team that is going to wear you for every single game that you play, whether it's a 4-game sweep or go 7 games. This is how this team is constructed, and Rudy Gobert is at the center of it. His defensive metrics have proven it. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to go down to Draymond Green. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it. It's the creme de la creme. It's the MVP award. much has been talked about. Harden, Westbrook, Harden. All right. Shaw, I'm going to let you start it off. Who do you have as your MVP?
Nope, ladies first.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, really? You're gonna pull that one out there. Oh, all right.
Here we go. Here we go. And I mean, I do cover this team, so I have a very lots of watching every game that they've played. I've seen every single game this season, so I've watched a lot of the other teams as well. But the runners up, shall we say, and James Harden does not get my second place. Kawhi does because of what the team has done.
Ooh, laying a smackdown before you even get to the.
She's been pretty consistent about the Rockets this entire show.
I mean, listen, this is the other thing. I look at the awards. They're talking about D'Antoni for coach. They're talking about Morey for exec. They're talking about Eric Gordon or Lou Williams for sixth man. And they're talking about James Harden for MVP. How can a team that's gotten third, partially because Utah has been injured and, well, I don't like the Clippers, so I won't even throw them in the mix. But how can they get 4 awards? And then we barely even have mentioned San Antonio or Golden State. So for me, Kawhi got second. I do put James Harden third. LeBron gets fourth because when you're the 29th ranked defense, I'm sorry, I just can't give it to you, even though he'll be a different man in the playoffs. John Wall, to me, gets consideration over top of Isaiah Thomas because of his on-off court stats. The team is so much better defensively with Isaiah off the court, and I think he'll be stopped in the playoffs. Giannis figures in, but he's trailed off. But Russell Westbrook, the Brody, is the man. I'm sorry, but maybe everyone's tired of hearing about Russell Westbrook and Oscar Robertson. But people, this is 55 years in the making. 55 years since a player has averaged a triple-double. 55 years since a player has garnered 41 triple-doubles, and he's probably going to get 42 before the season is over. And when we look at 82 games, we break the season into quarters. We break them into the opening quarter. We break them into the quarter leading up to the All-Star break, the post-All-Star break, and the stretch run. Down the stretch run is where Russell Westbrook has solidified that he deserves to win MVP. He has, since March 9th, I think it is, registered the only perfect triple-double ever recorded. He has registered the highest scoring triple-double. He has brought the team back from double-digit deficits twice to win games. He's improved their overall record on the road. He has registered a triple-double against 27 teams this season and only has the Chicago Bulls all-time not to have registered one against. The big thing for me is, and I use this analogy all season long, if you take James Harden off the court, that team still wins. If you take Russell Westbrook off the court, the team flounders. If you take Russell Westbrook off this team, they are a lottery team. He performs better in the clutch than he does when he's playing the majority of the game. His turnovers go down, his points go up, and head-to-head, when Harden and Westbrook have played, Harden wins every single category except for assist, even three-point shooting. I rest my case.
And it's a strong case. It truly is. I don't have much deviation, from even that top 5, if you will, with the exception, I think, of Thomas and Wall at the 5 there. I just, maybe my Celtics bias, has me taking IT over Wall, and I do recognize the defensive deficiencies that are there with the Celtics and Isaiah Thomas. But again, they can't even win without him on the floor, one way or the other, offensively or defensively. So Thomas would get the 5th nod, and I know it doesn't really matter at that point. Like, I agree with LeBron is probably 4th. I do think Kawhi is going to be 3rd. And here's the thing about Harden for me. And I've had this conversation on our show plenty of times already too. But 2 years ago, I think Harden was the MVP over Curry. Not Curry last year when Curry obviously
2 years ago.
I think 2 years ago
I agree.
When Curry had that that first run, if you will. Harden did more with less, because Dwight was hurt that year and the whole 9.
Everybody was.
Right. And everyone just kind of overlooked that, if you will. And I feel like to some degree, those voters who kind of felt bad, and then I think Harden ended up winning the Players' Choice Award for MVP that summer, or the case would be, well, it doesn't really hold any weight. I think some of those voters may kind of come to his side now. But with all that said, for me, I wholeheartedly agree. that Russell Westbrook should be this year's MVP. If I had a vote, that's definitely who would go to. Again, for many of the reasons that you just mentioned, and that and more. I don't know that many people said that they were going to fall out of the playoffs without KD, but the fact that the same thing that they've been as competitive as they have been. Yes, they're locked into that 6th seed right now with pretty much a matchup against the Houston Rockets in the playoffs. So that should be a lot of fun. But I cannot believe we're in an era right now where somebody is averaging a triple double. I keep saying, kind of been joking, I don't know how many fantasy leagues Russell Westbrook has won for people single-handedly. He's been absolutely amazing, let alone what he's doing on the court for this OKC Thunder team. And Billy Donovan hasn't been getting a lot of credit for anything what OKC has done. It really has been Russell Westbrook alone. And then obviously, as you alluded to a little bit earlier, with Presti trying to give them some help at the All-Star break. But Russ is that guy. James Harden is going to be too, in my boat. But I think Harden's probably going to win it by the media standard.
Is it going to be?
I hope
is
not.
it going to be crazy? Look, I'm going to agree with you guys across the board. I think Russell Westbrook is going to win the MVP, no question. I think though what would have separated, because I actually had at the beginning of the year, I think up till All-Star break, I actually had James Harden as the MVP, and part of the reason why I said that is because James Harden at that time not only was yielding out more 50-point games, but he was also leading the league in assists. Now he'll wind up finishing off the season leading the league in assists, but I think what happened in the second half, after the trade deadline. The second half of that All-Star break, I think was really indicative of me seeing Russell Westbrook have the Oklahoma City Thunder play at another level. They were okay. They were sitting around in the middle, but they really stepped it up a notch. And to me, the impact of Russell Westbrook's triple doubles were more significant for the Oklahoma City Thunder to keep where they needed to be in the playoffs. And it had more significance than whatever James Harden was doing at that particular time. I thought that the Rockets were playing above their heads, and they did enough at the beginning of the season that you kind of see them now tailwind. But there's a gap between what you see from the 1, 2, 3 teams and everyone else down. It still was enough in my mind that you start focusing your attention to what Russell Westbrook was doing with the Oklahoma City Thunder, because the games still mattered for OKC. And the fact that Harden comes out, he looks really good, but Westbrook comes out and he dominates in every considered category. It's the same thing that we did with Giannis Antetokounmpo playing with the Bucks, because that is what it took for the Bucks to be in the playoff picture. I just think it's Russell Westbrook on steroids doing it, and for that, to me, he's deserving of being the MVP, no questions asked. I will say that I think Harden winds up being runner-up. To your point, though, a very, very big argument can be made, Tam, about Kawhi Leonard being deserving second because of the impact that he's made for the San Antonio Spurs, especially in the critical games that the Spurs had to play against. Yeah. You could have, if Russell Westbrook, if Russell wasn't doing what he was doing, you could be making the argument that Kawhi Leonard would be the MVP over James Harden because of the impact wins that the Spurs had in the second half of the season against the marquee teams.
And without Tim Duncan this year. The other factor is Russell has 11 triple doubles in the last 14 games. Like, hello. There's a great article on 16 Wins a Ring that Duncan Smith wrote. And just to give you one quick quote from him, when Russell Westbrook is off the floor, they're outscored by, well, it's now 13. At the time that he wrote it, April 6th, it was 9.1, but it's 13 points per 100 possessions. To put that number into context, the worst net rating team this season is the Los Angeles Lakers, and they get outscored by 7.5 points. The other factor that I'll make, that's just read that article. It's an amazing article. He also mentions they're 24 and 15 in clutch, and he's 62% usage in the clutch. The other factor that I'll make is, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. James Harden has, I think, 7 or 8 players on his team that shoot over 35% from 3. Russell has 2.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many numbers that go back and forth, and I've heard so many people be passionate one way or the other. There are some hardened supporters that, and I think a lot of it is still vindication from even 2 years ago. And they're like, well, who cares if there's some guys averaging a triple double? And all I can say is, what do you mean, who cares?
If it's not a big deal, then why doesn't it happen all the time?
Right. Exactly.
That boggles my mind.
And to be able,
it's so easy to get, why didn't LeBron ever do it?
Yeah.
And I think you would think Kevin Durant would be able to do it even when he was playing with Russell Westbrook. I mean, he right now, he's what?
It just shows you who was giving up what, right?
Right, more like Kevin Durant. I think he has like this remarkable number of scoring at least 10 points per game. Going as far back as whenever. So getting the points was never the problem for him. It was being able to get the assists and to be able to get the rebounds. But that was not his primary role with that basketball team. And to do it in clutch time. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think, but the argument that I heard the other day that made me, I guess, maybe waver a little bit, maybe do the stanky leg a little bit, was like, okay, well, if it's a matter of 1.9 rebounds, because it's not like Harden is like, he's averaging the most rebounds he's ever had in his life as well, at eight rebounds a game. So if it's just a triple double argument, I can understand why people might be hesitant on that to some degree. But it is a triple double coupled with the fact that it's needed for his team to win more than it is for the Houston Rockets. So I think we're all in agreement that Russ should get it, but I don't know. And the weird thing is that they're actually not even announcing this until way after the season. I think in some awards show in New York with Drake hosting, nonetheless, or whatever like that, like June 26 or something to that effect. So we have a long time to figure this out, unless Wojo blows the top off everything like he does all the time and announces everything on Twitter.
Do the pundits have to get in their picks before or after the playoffs?
No, before.
So
they still have to do it the regular season. Yeah.
All right, so they're sticking to. I don't know why they wouldn't. If they're going to do the show in June, why not let them wait till the playoffs are over?
Yeah, it's something I'm sure that Adam Silver and those guys will probably look at. But yeah, they have to get those votes in after the season, and then they don't announce it for basically 2 months. So
that's crazy, because especially now that they're going to be facing off against each other,
Right. Yeah, it's going to be.
But the other thing is, I've had people come at me, the trolls, and say, yeah, well, they're padding the stats. And I said, really? And I pulled up a stat that showed uncontested rebounds, and the players ranked were like within percentage points of each other. LeBron James, James Harden, and Steph Curry were all in that mix there. They were all within like 1 or 2 points of each other of the percentage of uncontested rebounds they were getting. And the other factor is the offense for OKC is transpires based on fast break ball, because he gets up the floor so fast. So of course it makes sense for him to take that rebound.
It's absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts.
I mean, anyone that thinks that I'm like just being Debbie Downer on the Houston Rockets, I'm with you guys. That 2 seasons ago, I argued the fact that Harden should have won MVP, because to me, it's the team that is the most valuable to his team. Can the team win without him on the floor? And they can't in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is picking in the lottery and probably taking the first, second, or third ball if Russell Westbrook leaves this team. And the other factor is, I'm sorry, but Russell Westbrook was like the evil child in Oklahoma City, and the golden child was Kevin Durant. And he's the one that walked away a week after he told Russell at dinner that there was nothing he could do to make him a better player, not to worry, they would do it next season. So I'm sorry, he got treated with kid gloves in Oklahoma City, and Russell's the one that said, okay, I'll come back and I'll sign and I'll be with you guys forever. So he deserves it for all the angst he's taken in Oklahoma City and around the league, for being the guy that stopped Oklahoma City from doing well.
Russ, you are the real MVP. Let that be known. Russ, you're the real
MVP.
You're the real MVP.
That was the title of my article 2 weeks ago. It was.
Woo! I tell you, you are the queen of the NBA. Let it not be said that really you should have another podcast named that. That should be what it's dubbed. You should be but if not, people need to definitely check out the upcoming podcast. It's called Tamberlyn's Tip Off. She is the boss. She holds it down. She'll be covering the Toronto Raptors during the playoffs. 4-16 wins a ring. You can catch her at TTOTAMBZ. Our girl, Tam Richardson. Tam, thank you so much for bringing the fire for the NBA awards. It's just absolutely awesome having someone like you on board to give us the goods, to give us the real on all of these guys that are definitely deserving of the awards for this season.
My pleasure. I'm going to go watch Russell Westbrook get his 42nd triple-double now.
No doubt, no doubt. Once again, we'd like to thank our girl, Tam Richardson, for hopping on board with us to help us break down and have an extensive discussion about the upcoming NBA awards, deservedly so. Marquee names, marquee play all throughout the NBA regular season. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.